Well, hi there. Thank you for joining this webinar on Microsoft EMS, Enterprise Mobility Suite, and how to pitch. The reason I recorded this seminar is because I delivered it live and I also recorded a Dutch version, and I got some really good feedback of partners who considered this like another way of approaching EMS, another way of pitching EMS, and it helps them in talking to customers about the emotional part of EMS, and it triggers people to kind of accelerate their decision process. So I thought it was a good idea to also provide you with an UK version, an English version, and this is what I'm delivering right now. So we're in for about 40 minutes of talking about EMS, but in a way that might fascinate and be a little bit more compelling than the pure product and feature focused approach you regularly get in these kinds of sessions. My name is Hans, and let me briefly introduce myself. So I walk through life as a supplier of inspiration and optimism, and I've noticed that this title, this function description, this role really triggers a fair amount of curiosity among the people whom I meet. I used to say that I was a coach or a trainer, a very well-defined and specific role, which kind of put me directly into a box. In the same way that when we talk about products and when we talk about very specific namings of products and features, we kind of predetermine how your audience is going to react. This is something we don't want to do. Actually, if we talk and if we sell ideas, we want people to start using their brains in a creative way without falling back on what they know. We want them to develop new ideas and new ways of thinking, and also be curious to discover new features and new opportunities for them. So what I noticed with the title Supplier of Inspiration and Optimism is that people immediately start asking questions. And that leaves me the time to listen to what their concerns are, what they're really interested in. And then I can adapt my pitch onto what is actually very valuable for them. So this is exactly what we're going to do with EMS. Of course, we're going to fall back on features and on product descriptions, but most of all, we're going to keep on triggering curiosity. Now, if you want to connect, feel free. This is my LinkedIn address, or you can connect on Twitter or Facebook. So far from me. Oh, by the way, just for the record, I have been a subcontractor, supplier of optimism for Microsoft for like the past 23 years. And apart from working for Microsoft, I'm very active in sales coaching for all kinds of target groups, both in the technology sector as well as in other vertical markets. And I also talk to a lot of business decision makers in small and medium companies every time I deliver seminars or webinars that can go from providing insights in the use and the value of technology, but also insights in how to live better lives, how to set better targets, how to manage time in a more convenient way. So you can find out more on LinkedIn as to what I exactly do and how people perceive what I'm doing. This webinar is recorded, so you can share it with other people, and I will provide you with a cocktail consisting of ingredients to make you feel comfortable when you have to inspire customers on the value of EMS. And the purpose is to drive conversations towards a customer lifecycle revenue, which is what it's all about today. Okay, we come from a transactional mode where we kind of invoice a considerable sum of money with the start of a project, and then we kind of keep on invoicing services. Whereas today we lose very often the big part of a project at the beginning, so the big amount of money, because we all start in sort of subscription ways of working. And the purpose to survive here is to find ways to increase that amount of recurring revenue in order to grow our business substantially and let's say in a durable way. So feel free to share this and let's get this thing going. One of the reasons why I started with thinking about, geez, it might be good to deliver a webinar was a very recent experience with a call center. These people called me to for support in dialing and doing some cold calling to, let's say, a list of, I think they had like 2,000 or 3,000 possible prospects they wanted to get in touch with. So I joined them. I joined the telesales team, and we talk a little bit, and I asked them, what kind of list are you going to use? Is it a list that you rented, that you bought? Is it a list of existing customers? And then someone in the team says, no, don't worry. It's a list that I took from my previous employer. And we know, and I know that it's a good list. It's a very recent list. It has been updated recently. And so you can imagine that my reaction was like, I beg your pardon, you just stole it, so to speak. And they kind of didn't even worry about that. They just said, yeah, we did, and this is the list we're going to work on. So imagine how much valuable information gets out of companies and gets into the hands of people who will use it afterwards, maybe against a company or just for their own profit. And maybe this could harm the victim who got rid of the information. So I went looking on the World Wide Web for some reports, and actually it's quite stunning. You know, when people leave a company, 87% of the people will admit that they take documents with them, certainly documents that they made themselves. Now, by the way, the pitch I'm delivering now is part of the conversation that I drive with business decision makers that you will have understood by now. So back to the story. So 87% admits that they take documents they made. 28% admits that they will take company data they haven't made themselves, but that they think is valuable, like my customer list. And then we have some information on what kind of documents they take with them. The majority is strategic documents, customer data, and intellectual property. This is the top three of information that gets out of a company when people leave the company. And how do they do it? Well, through their personal email, using a USB disk or an external hard disk, still the majority, and then printing out information, which is still very popular, and then the shadow cloud and personal cloud solutions like Dropbox and others, where they just copy and drop files for later usage. So when you consider this, you might think, okay, this is not going to happen because I trust my people and they will never do that to me. But okay, maybe 99% will not do it, but the 1% who will can really cause some major harm to an organization. And you may not feel it immediately, but indirectly you can start seeing things happening. Customers that order less, customers that leave, rumors that spread out on the market that you don't want. So it's definitely a good reason to think about, hey, what is happening with my information? Where are my people working? How are they working? What happens with email that I send out? How easy is it to forward email to personal mail addresses? How easy is it to kind of put a USB key in a device and just copy information? How easy is it to print and to use shadow cloud operations? Now, I know that throughout history, and I just told you that it's been 23 years now, even a little bit more, that I've been surfing in the technology world. And I've seen a lot of things, you know, on Windows devices, for instance, the possibility to prevent people from using non-authorized USB keys. We have BitLocker encryption. We have like a lot of things that were very relevant at the time when your IT and your data was collected in quite a controllable environment. Whereas today, with the advent of cloud computing and the penetration of cloud computing, things have changed dramatically. It's no longer about where people will maybe prevent or copy data. It's more about who are the people and can I protect the data wherever it resides, in the cloud, on USB key, or anywhere else. So Since this increased mobility has become the new normal, and since we all know that people will use personal devices for work purposes and that they will use email on their iPhones and Android devices, and that increasing amount of software is available through the cloud, and that also people tend to spend much more time out of their primary workplace than in the primary workplace. So with these concerns in mind, we really have to think about how can we do it. Now, if I ask a customer, so tell me about the current security challenges for you, I might end up with someone who really doesn't know what I talk about. No, they don't see a problem. Actually, they maybe are not even aware of the fact that so many things are at stake, which is normal, you know. They have been doing things for many years in the same way, so why would all of a sudden they have to change things? And this is something we want to avoid, right? We don't want to confront people with too much of solution selling for problems they may not be aware of. And digging into what potential problems, and I use the word intentionally, they may have, kind of creates a negative environment. And then we come up with a solution like help, we're the heroes, right? It works and it still works, but there are other ways, alternative ways to do it even with more impact, more emotional impact. And that's for me, at least, the difference between solution selling and value selling. Solution selling is more oriented towards the past. So imagine that you want to go on a holiday and you know that with booking facilities, imagine I'm a sales guy of a traveling agency, and I tell the customer, so hey, you know that we have booking facilities that will make you gain time in finding a plane and a hotel and a car, and we can even advise you our holiday air travels to make your trip even more comfortable. And once on site, our Car Finder app will help you to find a rental car easy without restaurant guide, and you will never be hungry. And so I assume you will also want to swim every now and then, so blah, blah, blah. Very product, very solution focused, based on a series of issues, pain points, we often refer them to, pain points that we imagine a customer might have because market research has shown that, or pain points that come out of a conversation. Now, this is good. You will not hear me say that you don't have to search for possible pain points. It's just a matter of changing the frame a little bit and changing the vocabulary. So the same story in value selling would be, so I'm happy to hear that you would like to enjoy a great holiday. Now, tell me, what will make your holiday great? And what will you see and feel that it is exactly what you wanted? And then you listen to what comes in. And the next thing is, could you tell more about, let's say, the three major security challenges that you see on your way to your destination or at your destination itself? So you feel that the context changes from a dark, problem-oriented conversation to a bright, value-oriented conversation, where we start talking about the destination and we then talk about the process. And what we actually do is we exploit the brain of our customer. Because what's actually happening in our brains is very simple. The very central part of our brain has the reptilian brain, but we're not going to talk about that one. That's the one that decides on fight or flight. But around this one, there is like the limbic zone. And that's the very interesting part. That's where our emotions are managed and where our emotions are triggered. This is where, for instance, let me give you a very concrete example. If you walk through a street, for instance, and all of a sudden you catch this nice smell that throws you back decades back in time when you were young, and it associates your emotion with maybe your grandparents or something you really lived very intensively, you definitely recognize that emotion or that scenario, right? So what happens is that a smell or an observation directly plays on that limbic brain and it gives you a good feeling. Okay, now with words, when we talk to people, most of the time we directly address the cortex, the creative, the planning part, and not necessarily the emotional part. And that's where a lot of things end in a different way than we had expected. And a lot of conversations end with, you know what, let us think about it. We'll get back to you, right? That's not necessarily the answer you would like to. So how can you directly or inverse the flow? because the flow is very simple. It goes from the inside to the outside. It's like a one-way street. I'm not going to say that the cortex does not report back to the limbic system or cannot influence your emotions, but basically your primary reflexes will be emotional reflexes. So if I talk to a customer about value, value is an emotional thing. So I'm going to talk about, hey, where does your company want to go to? What are your plans? What would you like to achieve? Like I would do exactly when we plan a holiday. I will also not start talking about how to get there. I will first sell the idea, the dream, the value of the holiday resort, and all the emotional things that come with it. And when that is clear, I can then start talking about the boring part, the complex part, the cortex part, the planning. How much time will you have to wait for your connecting flight? Is it going to be in time? What are the risks that you lose your luggage and how can you protect yourself against that? What about parking fees in an all too expensive company airport parking, etc., etc.? Now, you've all made trips, I'm very sure of this, and you've all been in these airports wondering exactly what you were doing there. But the destination is compelling enough to live with the processes and the solution. So let's consider value and let's focus on value and then use that one-way street to start planning. And you will see that your customer will be much more excited in listening to you, will be much more curious in listening to you, just as when I use, in the very beginning, supplier of optimism, it creates like an emotional status where people will then go to the outer part of their brains and they would like to fill in the holes. But at least we have the emotional commitment. That's a very interesting thing. Certainly when you sell technology, where we tend to do it the other way around, right? We would feed the brain with a lot of facts and figures and features and functions, hoping that at least one or two of them will get through the limbic part and create this emotional, wow, yes, I want it, which is much more difficult. And actually, why is that happening? Well, a lot of people have been working in an environment for quite a long time. So they have become, I would say, your customers are most of the time unconsciously competent in what they do. And they feel good with that. You know, they've always had on-premise things. They have never had any problem with security to the extent, or at least that they are aware of. So they don't even think about what they do. It just happens and they have the impression that it works. Now, their initial decision many years ago may have been an emotional one, and they said like, okay, we're going to do this. And then the planning and the creative part of their brains took over and they start doing things, and the emotional part will go a little bit maybe in oblivion, right? And then the cortex takes over and everything works fine. And they don't relate it back to the emotional part. They don't check off things and everything is fine. But meanwhile, of course, a lot of things happen on the market. Look at what happens in technology. We have cloud computing, we have mobile devices, we have increasing internet connectivity, we have social media. There's a lot of things that happen out there that we know because it's our business, but a lot of our customers don't know. So they're unconsciously incompetent in a lot of areas. And since they don't know, on top of that, that they don't know it, they have no feelings about it. You still following? So if you don't know that you don't know, or you don't know that you don't do, well, you're like lobotomized, I would even say. You don't care. It's not an issue. So one of the most important things that we have to do is trigger that emotional part, that feeling part, by giving information, by making them consciously incompetent, by talking about our products like mobility suites, like Office 365, like Azure and other cloud services that we would like to sell. We have to trigger emotions. We have to make people not feel good anymore or not feel good because they don't do a thing, because all of a sudden they get aware of it. And look, this is not new. You have all been in meetings where at one point someone is working on their emails because they don't care about what is being said. And then someone says something and ooh, they drop everything and they say, wow, this catches my attention. You know, that's the moment, the aha moment where someone becomes consciously incompetent. And it's only then that you will start talking about the planning part. You will provide the how to cope with that with that consciously incompetent part. And that's where people start feeling better with how they do it. But beware, if we sell EMS, for instance, and then we put it into practice, you will have reactions of customers who say like, I thought it was going to be much more simple. Even you, when you look back on what Microsoft proposes, and in Microsoft's marketing, it's all like, wow, paradise, until you start working with it. And then you say, wow, this isn't that easy, and this doesn't work, and this doesn't work the way I expected it. That's normal, because in that very stage that we're talking about right here, you are what I would call consciously competent. It means that you have to think about everything that previously you did without thinking, you know? There's a lot of examples. Take the example of driving a car. You all know that when you started to learn driving a car, it was a hell of a job. You had to think about how much or how many times you have to turn the ignition key. If you have an automatic gearbox, what is the D, the R, etc. all for. If you have a manual gearbox, this coordination between the pedals is really a hell of a challenge. But after a couple of years, you don't even think about it until the moment you change from an automatic gearbox to a manual gearbox or vice versa. And then it takes a couple of hours to really live it consciously. And you're like, oh, I thought automatic gearboxes would have been much more easy, but look what happens. It's complicated. So the same thing with our technology. And this, by the way, is a traditional learning cycle. We all get through this whenever we learn something, and actually selling something is learning new habits to our customer and making these new habits so compelling that people tend to forget about the old ones, or that the little emotional happiness trigger provided by the new solution is bigger than the emotional happiness trigger of the old solution. Now, how can we tackle this? Well, we drive conversations. We will talk about emo and ratio in an alternate way. We can start questioning people about, hey, where does your company want to evolve to? What will be the impact on the people working here? What are the important things on the way to realizing the challenge for each of these roles and functions? And how are people going to do and cope with the challenges that are important to them to realize the final goal? Uh, what will they exactly do and how will they behave? And will there be changes in their behavior and maybe also in the environment where they will be working? So it's a series of questions. You don't have to kind of run from top to bottom. I personally like to do it this way because it also allows me to make people say things that I can reuse afterwards. If someone stated a mission and a vision clearly and a target and a challenge they want to achieve, and then I get to the resources and they say like, well, no, really, we're not going to use it. I can get back to these challenges and tell them things like, I thought I understood that this would be where you wanted to go to, and that in terms of roles and functions, these people would be impacted, and that for these people, X, Y, and Z are very valuable and important items on the way to achieving the target. So it's not really clear to me why the resource that we are discussing now all of a sudden would not be relevant, and then you challenge people to kind of talk about their resistance or their objection. So you don't necessarily have to follow it, but it can help. What I tend to do is start on top and go all the way down, and then for the rest of the conversation, move up and down between the emotional part, which is obviously the three top levels, and the bottom part, which is the rational part. Now, if you would draw a line between these three levels and you would make a fraction of it, and the fraction would be your success in sales, then you could say that if 10 items are rational and one item is emotional in your conversation, then you would have a success rate of 1 on 10. I know it's not exactly, but hey, look, it's a nice way of approaching things. So by just increasing this part to maybe 3 or 4 or 5, my success will increase as well. And the more complicated the solution is, the more important it is to talk about the value. Obviously, things will change if in your role or in the role of the person you talk to is a BDM or an ITDM, so which means a business decision maker or an IT decision maker, you may focus a little bit more in kind of when it's an IT guy or girl, maybe focus a little bit more on the resources and on the impact, but always check off what is important for these people. Because what used to be important for an IT director like a decade ago or maybe 5 years ago is not necessarily relevant today. So we also challenge people to that extent. And the purpose here is like John Cleese in Faulty Towers. You remember obviously the episode where he had German visitors, and he really insists on everybody, his wife and Manuel and others, not to mention the war. And yet he does it. Well, of course, you're not in Faulty Towers here, but I would say instead of don't mention the war, don't mention the product. I think it's really challenging to challenge people to talk about their real business concerns, their aspirations, and let them finish the conversation and keep on asking questions about their stories. What I hear often is that you ask a question, where you want to go to with your company. Okay, this is where we would like to be the number one in customer service. We would like to be in the top 3 in our region of that kind of service provider. And then most of the time when the customer gives a reply, the salesperson already is preparing a solution, right? This is typical of solution selling. Okay, you want to achieve this? Well, I have blah, blah, blah. Don't do it. Wait until the very end. Certainly with complex things like EMS, actually what should happen is that you talk about challenges, you talk about aspirations, you talk about behavior, about important things. And in the end, your customer will say that, so, oh, and you do have a solution. And actually, they don't even care about what the solution is. The important thing is that you have something that will realize or support them in their way to achieving. So how can we do it? Well, let's try it out. It starts with the identity, for instance. In the conversation, we are on the level of mission and vision, and let's say the destination. What is the holiday you would like to live with your company? And how will it affect the people? So then we start about the people in the organization and what is important for them. And we get to the point of identity, right? Every person in a company has an identity, and wouldn't it be cool if we could provide these people with a good, smooth experience across everything they use and everything they do? And also, from a company point of view, wouldn't it be smooth if someone leaves the company that we just have one location where we need to manage the identity and as such block access to all valuable things? So that's identity management. Now, we can start when we talk about identity management about all of the features, the single sign-on, the self-service experiences, the common identity, the conditional access, the SaaS applications, where even many people don't even know that SaaS stands for software as a service. But anyway, so that's the Cortex part. Or we could just talk about how today do you manage all of your applications and your devices. And if you would be invited to talk about 3 things that you really like, what would they be? And you listen, and then you continue your questioning, and you say, now, and if there would be like 2 or 3 things where you say like, Jesus, this is really boring the crap out of me, what would it be? And if people don't come up with answers immediately, we can add some things. We can talk about references, about people that have issues or that would experience it as very comfortable or have experienced it as very comfortable, that they need to remember less passwords and that they have a smooth experience across devices. They do something on machine 1 and then they can continue on machine 2. And from a security point of view, that they don't have to worry about their personal settings and activities on a device and their professional settings, that there's kind of a clear separation between the two of them. So we will sense for that emotional part in here before we start digging into the creative outside part. And that again is using these things, right? So I heard that you want to become the number 1 in your sector. Now it is important that all coworkers focus on that goal, and whatever their part in the play is, they should be able to proceed worry-free in achieving this part of their job. And so a transparent environment where they can connect in an easy way to the resource they need while you keep control might be an interesting thing to have. And then you can add an example of a similar customer describing the effect on the actions and the behavior, and then maybe relate this back to the mission and the vision. This is just one framework, but I'll leave you guys and girls to kind of use this framework in your conversations. And then you can start talking about identity management. Because this is all, it's all user oriented today. People will use different devices, will use different applications. And let me just briefly start with the device, for instance. I'm really thrilled since I use a fingerprint recognition on my Surface tablet, since I use eye recognition on my Lumia 950. It's all these Windows Hello stuff. I'm even very excited that on my Windows devices, since I adopted Windows 10, I can now use this Azure identity, or for most people, it's my Office 365 name and password to connect, and then have this first impression of single sign-in, this kind of experience, which for most of you will be like obvious, but for a lot of people, it's interesting. We'll get back to that. The next thing we would like to know before we dive into how these identities can be managed is, what do all these identities use in terms of applications? And where do they connect onto, and how do they do it? So I was surprised when I found the report in which I saw some figures. It's my Price Waterhouse and Cooper. They kind of had this in 2015 investigation where they looked at the number of cloud services used in an organization and the number of unsafe services and the number of personal cloud services that are used, and also the average number of cloud services per employee used during work hours, but also used during the weekend. And the most striking thing is that 0% of these shadow cloud solutions meet with the policies that are adopted by the company, if any policies are at stake. So you can imagine, I mean, I was as surprised as that lady here when I read this, and I said, whoa. And it's normal. You can read a lot of updates and a lot of statuses where people talk about this topic, and they say, like, if you ask the employees, they will all say, yeah, I use Dropbox, I use personal OneDrive, I use iCloud, I use a lot of things, because our users have become customers, right? If what IT provides them does not meet with what they actually need in their day-to-day businesses, they're going to look for a solution themselves. They're going to use freewares they download, little apps on their phones to make their lives easier. And that's something we would like to control, of course. So one of the things that EMS allows you to do is, apart from managing the identity, we can also kind of put a sort of an inventory of what people are using in terms of applications, and then start creating single sign-in experiences on the devices that people use in a very controlled way. So this discovery, both on-premise as well as in the cloud of applications, for me is one major step forward on the way to our final destination, which is become the number one or whatever. It is to have a clear view of who uses what. Because becoming number one means that we need a streamlined organization where we all look in the same directions, where we all use the same platform in a coherent way, and where interactions are optimized. So this is part one. Cloud application discovery, and then manage the identity. And as I said, identity management for a user, it should be a good experience. How difficult is it to manage passwords as a user, but also how difficult is it to renew them, to adopt password policies, to give users access to company resources, and then forget to delete these accesses when people leave the company. So we also should make this like an easy way of working. And as I said, it starts with the device users will adopt. On my Windows phone, I use this eye recognition, this retina recognition. On my iPhone, I have fingerprint recognition. On my Windows device, I use also Windows Hello, either with the camera on the Surface 4 Pro or on fingerprint recognition on other devices if you have the keyboard that goes with it. So it's cool. And then, as I said, my Office 365 is actually managed in Azure, at least my identity. So, and there is this nice feature, even in the free version of Azure, that allows me to kind of add applications to that user ID. I did it for a number of company applications, like accounting package I use, like some CRM package that I use. And I added to that a number of social media logins that I use for the company that are separate from what I use personally. And I also use it for booking.com and for many other applications, which means in terms of experience that since I put that in practice, I just log in using fingerprint recognition on my Windows 10 device, and all of the applications that I need professionally are managed by that single sign-in Azure directory. So it's cool because let's not forget EMS, as you may know or you will discover, is a set of solutions. You know, it has a part of Azure Active Directory Premium services. It has got some Intune in it. It has got rights management services in it. So it's like you could consider it like a big sausage, you know, and it's not the purpose to stuff the entire piece of meat entirely in the mouth of your customer. It's not a very tasteful and not a very pleasant experience. So what you're going to do is you're going to slice the piece of meat into different small slices, offer some for free to get the person emotionally into the story and into the experience, and then add with some things that you will ask money for. And so this Azure Directory thing is a good way to make people familiar. But of course, they would like the same for on-premises. They would like to have maybe a multi-factor authentication linked to the identity, and that's where you can bridge to the premium version. And once you're at that premium part, it's an ideal bridge to say, look, since we are working towards that destination, why not go immediately for an EMS solution where on the trajectory to your final destination over the next 1.5 years, for instance, we will activate an increasing number of functions to make you live and to make your users live a good experience. So it's cool. You will add self-service password reset experiences, for instance. That's a premium version. You will extend this to on-premises infrastructure. And this will really give users, first of all, a safe environment, an environment where you as a customer will determine what kind of applications they are allowed to use and how you manage the logins and the identities to all of these solutions. And you can do that in different devices in different ways. The next thing will then be the next part, the devices that people use and the information. But with identity management, you will increase the end user experience. You will also have like this unified single sign-on experience, both in the cloud and on premises. You would also have an integrated identity solution, taking back or eliminating the risks of abuse and also control of the identity when people leave the company. So it's cool, and it's a lot less effort demanding when you want to set up all of this infrastructure. So then we're back to the conversation. We've been talking about the roles and the functions and about what is important to people. And one of the first things was the experience of being able to work without having to remember a lot of things and also be able to manage the identity. The next part will be about the number of devices people use. It goes without saying that it's a fact that people use, even without knowing it, an increasing number of devices. And a lot of personal devices they will be using for work purposes. And these will not all be the main joint. A home PC, a little tablet. So this bring your own device, which used to be a buzzword a couple of weeks or months or years ago, preferably, has now become more like a habit. So how can IT, apart from managing the identities, also manage the different devices and the applications that people use? That's the next big thing. So in our conversation, it could be where are you going to, who is going to be impacted, and then what would you feel would be the ideal set of tools that people can use to do in an optimal way what they do. And if we look at the bring your own device, the challenges, we will see that a lot of employees will be using smartphones. A lot of them, let's say 2/3 will be their own device, and it will be mainly used for email, but also for web browsing, for contact management, calendar applications, up to Salesforce automation or customer relation management. So it's something we cannot just neglect. Okay, it's going to happen anyway, so we might better be in control. With mobile device management, we are in the Intune part of EMS. And that's where we will talk about how people can use the company portal on their devices. It's one scenario. You can also like impose it, but you will download or you will propose a company app available on all platforms in the different stores. People will log in using their single identity they have to remember, and then they will kind of enroll their device. And once it's enrolled, they will have company applications and locations they will be able to use, and IT can apply a set of policies on the devices. Policies that could bear on the fact that they need to add maybe a more complicated PIN code on their device, or any other policy that might be relevant to secure the professional part of the usage. And that's cool. It's not only the device, but once we're there, we can also do mobile application management. And that's something I really adore. So we have got our personal iPad, for instance. We use a lot of personal stuff on it and some work related stuff. So what I would like to manage is my professional applications, because if someone leaves the company, I would like to be sure that the company owned applications and data will no longer reside on the device. Whereas at the same time, I would like to leave all of the personal applications intact when my employee leaves the company. So what we're going to do through Intune is kind of separate these two nicely, and not only separate them like in a container, but we'll also reduce the traffic between the managed applications and the personal applications. I think this is really a cool feature because it is a part of EMS, of course, and it's all linked to one another. There's a part of right management in it, there's a part of application management in it, but for the user, the scenario would be like I receive an email in my professional email. There is like this 3,000 Excel sheet, let's say this Excel sheet with 3,000 contacts in it, and I say like, wow, this is cool. I'm going to change employer. Let's copy that one to my personal Dropbox, for instance, or to a personal application. Well, with a solution like EMS and one of the components in EMS, we have these application level policies that can actually prevent people from copying things that come from the professional container into the personal one. Within the professional container, they can copy and paste as much as they want, but storing or pasting into personal environments will not be working. And that's cool because that will like maximize my productivity while preventing leakages of company data by restricting the actions such as cut, copy, paste, save, etc. From outside your managed application environment. And so that's a nice thing because from that company portal, we can not only manage the policies, but we can also then delete all of the access, sort of a selective wipe through a self-service company portal or an admin console. So the personal applications and the data will be kept intact. And that's a cool feature for any kind of user. So the mobile device and application management part will provide a couple of really perceivable and tangible values. First of all, a consistent experience across all the devices. Secondly, a secure access to corporate data and applications. And third of all, a single management console for all of the mobile devices and PCs across all operating systems you can imagine, including iPhone, Android, and Windows RT. So that's a very, very interesting thing. And that brings us back to the conversation. We've been talking about identities, we've been talking about applications, we've been talking about devices, but there is still, of course, the information part itself. Now, maybe just between brackets, while you are talking, you are asking questions and you are listening to people, always listen very, very carefully. Because when your customer talks, there's a lot of things they will not tell you, not because they don't want to share it, but maybe because they assume that you know it or that you will fill in the gaps. We also have to make sure that what they say is in line with how we interpret it. You know, if I say I'm going to have a good drink, some people may think spontaneously on beer, other people may think about wine, and others about gin tonic. So the word drink receives different meanings. So if I talk about security, if if I talk about application management, or if my customer does, are we aligned? Are we talking about the same thing? Now, recent investigations and research in sales profiles have shown that challenger sales turn out to be the most performing salespeople, certainly when it comes to selling complex solutions. And I think it's normal because they challenge people. They challenge them not to be a mismatcher or something, but they challenge people to understand exactly what parts may be missing in a reply. They align consistently the information they get with how they interpret it. And they tend to be very critical of another trap, which is generalization. Someone may have had a bad experience somewhere and takes that for the general truth. So we need to be able to challenge people on these three levels. And that means that we listen actively, we isolate components, we check what is not said, and then we challenge the components. Just one example to illustrate, because this is just a brief webinar, but if you want more, you can always get in touch with me and we can see how we can be complementary in this area. But if someone says that looks too complex, we won't need all this, like for instance for EMS, there's a lot of challenges here. What exactly, for instance, looks too complex? If you say it looks complex, do you mean it is, or you experience it, or you perceive it as complex? If you say too complex, it means that you compare it to something else. What would it be? We won't need all this. Who do you exactly think about? Is it you? Is it your company? Is it your IT, etc.? And we won't need when. You won't need it right now. You won't need it tomorrow. You have not needed it so far, but you might need it, but you're not yet really clear on where and how and when. And all this, what part exactly do you mean with all this? So you see, there's active listening is a skill in itself, but it helps you certainly when we talk about more complex environments like EMS. It's very good and very useful to really listen actively and to challenge the customer and to have the customer talk themselves into the solution. And so the same thing goes, of course, for the things that we are discussing right now. Because we've been talking about the identity and the mobile devices and applications, but the data is even the most important thing. So how can I control the access to data? How can I control the rights that are applied on data? And how can I secure the entire environment? And that's a very interesting point. And here we have the third part, which is the RMS part. And now some people may say, but hey, there is RMS in Office 365. Totally truth. And the RMS in Office 365, the rights management services, bear on components that reside in the Office 365 environment. Whereas if we go to the RMS that is part of EMS, you will extend it to maybe your own local repositories or other repositories that reside in other cloud environments. So that's a good reason to, again, start from something people have and expand to what they don't have. Now, again, you can start from real life scenarios, like what happens when you're in meetings? How do you process information? What information do you want to access? If afterwards you share information with people, can you maybe stick expiration dates on it? Can you prevent people from taking files offline or from copying or forward them? So there's a lot of things that can be applied to sensitive corporate information, whether it be office documents or other documents. So the bigger challenges here will be how to access or how to prevent access to these documents, or let's say how to prevent abuse of the documents without making the experience a very, very complicated one. And this is all about conditions. It's about rights management. It's about preventing people from accessing information because they don't have the right identity, up to preventing people to kind of forward information or print information or copy information from one device onto another. So these are really a set of rules, a set of policies that you will spread out using Intune, and that will help you to set up really good environments where a number of rules can be applied. Now, these rules, there are a few basic ones like don't forward, don't print, don't edit, just read only. But of course, you can add your own set of rules depending, for instance, on content that is in a document. If you want to be compliant with certain regulations, you may go to the extent that you use all of the EMS solutions to kind of look at data in sort of an email or a report and then have rules applied to what can happen to that information and what cannot happen to that information. So it's cool. It allows people to use the information when they need it without giving them the freedom of copying it on any other device they want to use. And so, to get back to the very first story I told you about, that person at telesales who just, without being ashamed, even said like, hey, look, I took that list from my previous employer. Well, that could be a scenario that is no longer a valid one. Unless, of course, that guy takes with his camera screenshots of the screens and the lists, but I think that would be really a not very interesting and effective way. So this is where it all comes together. This is where we will focus on conversations. Another little tip, when people talk, forget about the yes, but, and train yourselves into using interesting and as a reply, certainly when it comes to objections, because the interesting and will kind of almost force you into inviting the other person to talk about more details about what they have deleted, what they may see differently than we do, and what they may have generalized. That's a very interesting trick when you drive conversations. And this brings us to the end of our salami story. So don't forget to slice the EMS sausage, if we can call it that way, into different slices. You use AD in Office 365, you turn it into a premium. You make single sign-on effect, you add application management, you add device management, you add RMS, and then you can start beginning with more additional sources of value. And in the end, what you will yield is money over the entire customer lifecycle. And also the fact that all of these solutions allow you to give feedback to the customer, showing them through reports that everything is working fine and delivering this really cool experience will definitely help you to build durable relations with the people. So the end user experience, the management efficiency, and the information protection is actually what we remember from all this. And desktop virtualization might also be an interesting component into this area. We'll talk about that in another session. I would like to finish over here, thanking you very much for having been here. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn or Twitter if you have any questions on this challenging sales mechanism. Remember that it is all about emotion, and only then it's about the practical, creative side, the planning side, or to quote Simon Sinek, it's from the why to the what and not the other way around, because this is less efficient. And really think about scenarios where you feel the king. On a restaurant, remember that the chief knows the ingredients, he knows how to cook, but he does not talk about it. You order the result and you enjoy the effect of what you eat. So make sure that you know all about the products, that you know all about the features, that you make good property of it, intellectual property that you can sell to your customers, but sell the result and have people enjoy the effect. I thank you very much for having been here. These are the addresses where you can connect, have fun, and sell a lot of subscriptions and make a lot of money with Microsoft's cloud solutions. Take care. Bye-bye for now.